Welcome to episode 1 of X-Manson Analysis. I am M. X-Manson is an infamous dark fanfic about the X-Men written sometime in 2000 by a writer using the pseudonym Dr. Benway. The podcast presents Marvel's Merry Mutants as a wicked cult. With this podcast, I aim to perform a dissection of the story as a piece of alternate reality fiction and how it relates to certain real-world concepts and history. If you have any insight you wish to help me with, please drop a voicemail at 913-703-4750. This will be the only episode where I will read the entire chapter in full. The rest of the episodes will break down the chapters into chunks with analysis coming afterwards. We'll begin with Dr. Benway's notes as they set up the universe of the story and how it diverges from ours. We'll come back to this, but after I read the story in full, we'll begin with the analysis in earnest. Benway's story begins here. Hello, I've written a story. I found it rather fun to write it, and thanks to the nature of the internet, you can find comfort in the fact that I almost certainly live a long way away from where you do. The story makes non-profit use of characters owned by Marvel Comics. It is not for the young, the sensitive, or the easily perturbed, and it has parts that should not be read after a heavy meal. The following apply. 1. Just because someone is a hero or villain in the real books doesn't mean they are a hero or villain in the story. 2. The American presidents since 1956 were McCarthy, Kennedy, Johnson, Kennedy, King, Bradley, Kennedy, Rodham, and Rush. In America, hope dominates, fear all look to the future. This is fiction. 3. The Vietnam War ended with the intervention of a UN mediator in 1964, and the Soviet Empire collapsed in 1970. Excuse me. Many thanks to Luba, Tricia, and Alara for proofreading. This and other work by me is kept in a locked and padded room at the Archive of Luba, located at http://home.att.net/ I don't know what that little symbol is. Lubametkia. Enjoy. B. Composed under the influence of 2 weeks of Errol Morris documentaries Blur, The Benfolds Five, the never-ending NPR coverage of the 2000 American presidential election. Work as if you were in the early days of a better nation. Alistair Gray, 1984. X-Manson, Saskatoon Today, Jerusalem, 1955. 1 out of 5. The room is very small. It is 12 feet by 10 feet, not including the bathroom that was once a closet. Along one wall, there is a steel kitchenette unit that was once lime green. It contains a sink and a refrigerator that is so small it puts the place in violation of the building codes. Next to the kitchenette is a small table with a kitchen chair. There are papers on the table, neatly stacked. They are the weekly problem sets turned in by 231 first-year physics students at the University of Saskatchewan, where she works as a teaching assistant. There is a check on the table still in its envelope. It is for a very small amount of money, less than half of what the alcoholic prostitute downstairs collects on disability. She also sleeps in the room. There is a small bed in one corner that she sits on. There is a plastic milk crate in one corner. A 13-inch color television and VCR sit on the crate. The remainder of the room is filled in by bookcases. There are 2 that block 2 windows, nailed into place with 2x4s. The bookcase is filled with expensive books on physics that are borrowed or stolen from a number of Prairie University libraries. There is another bookcase and a file cabinet blocking the door, which is sealed off by 2x4s. None of this stops her from getting in and out. Her landlord could care less, as long as he gets his check each week. Not that he would complain if he did enter. The entire room and its attached bathroom are spotlessly clean, with orange shag carpeting, from the orange shag carpeting to the off-white spackled ceiling. She sits on the bed. She is of average height for a woman, 64 inches tall. Her brown hair is cut short, very short. She is slight, the kind of slightness that comes from potential fatal illness of psychological origin. She stares. It unnerves people, drives them away. The only ones who don't notice are the ex-psychiatric patients who live in her house and on her street. She is the only person not living there because she has no other choice. No one is upset by her staring, because she is alone and staring at the television. It is tuned to the local CBC affiliate. The National just finished, and now there will be a documentary. She is going to watch the documentary. On her table is a receipt from the counseling center, where she went when she discovered that the documentary was going to be shown uncut. The credits come on, indicating the film has been produced by Film 4 International, Canal Plus, RAI, ZDF, and the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. It is a film about the United States of America. Caption: Salem Center, New York, April 1st, 1998. A shot of multiple cop cars at night. Lights flashing. Shot of a line of small, filthy, wildly staring children being led from a large, dilapidated mansion. Shot of a balding, emaciated man with bandaged eyes being led from the house in handcuffs. Shot of 4 heavily pregnant women being led away in handcuffs. 2 are Oriental, 2 are not. Caption: Henry Vanderbilt, President, New Salem Investments, Rye, New York. Shot of a middle-aged man in a good suit in a comfortable room. He has a neatly trimmed Van Dyke beard. He is clearly rather well-to-do. HV. I sold the house to the man who called himself Xavier in the spring of '68. I don't know where he came from. He had money. He paid in cash. He said he wanted to set up a school. The house was perfect for that. The Jesuits had it for 30 years after it had been built by the man who used to own all the smoked meat shops. Italian, I think he was. At any rate, the house was perfect for school. After he moved in, I heard he was telling all the people that he was from one of the older families of the area. Lies, all lies. Old money here dates back to Dutch settlers from 400 years ago. That man showed up off a boat from somewhere. Tangiers, I heard. Shot of a 70-ish woman dressed as if it were still 1948. This is clearly not an affectation, but rather a willful act of rejection of every development in fashion since MacArthur marched through Pyongyang. Caption: Elizabeth Grundy, County School Board, retired, White Plains, New York. E.g. He started with 5 students, and I found that somewhat unusual. Private schools generally had larger classes than that. I was also surprised to see that there were no other instructors, at least not at first. Interviewer: But he had other teachers later, e.g. I do recall meeting some, yes. A physical education teacher by the name of Logan comes to mind. We had records of others. Interviewer: Did you inspect the school? E.g. Personally, only once. It seemed a respectable, well-equipped establishment. I recall that he had a most marvelous pâté at the lunch that they served. Did you meet any of the students? E.g. I suppose I met the original 5. I understand they'd had some problems in other schools, although none of them looked in any way unusual except for the boy with big hands and feet, big feet and hands. Excuse me. Interviewer, Henry McCoy, E.G. Yes, Henry. He did well at Princeton, I understand. The others didn't seem to thrive. There was that shy boy, Scott Summers, and the wisecracking boy, Robert Drake, I believe. There was also Warren Worthington, whose father financed the school. And there was only one girl, that poor Jean Grey. I had no idea what abilities they might have. Interviewer. Why was the license granted to a man with no teaching credentials? E.g. It was as if we had any choice. With the power he possessed, he might have made us do anything. Shot of a balding, deeply tanned man in a short-sleeved, thoroughly pressed shirt. Caption: Lieutenant Benjamin Kupperman, MP, retired. Haifa, Israel. BK. A teacher? No. When he was here, he was a psychiatrist. No one questioned it at the time. He was so good with catatonic patients. Too damn good. Interviewer. How long was he at the Institute? BK. 8 months, until Professor Lehnsherr uncovered him. Interviewer. This was the Haller case? BK. Yes. Interviewer. Were you ever able to establish where he'd come from? BK. The professor traced him back to Tangiers, but before that, nothing. Shot of a couple in a very expensive and very Central European hotel suite. The man is handsome with snow-white hair and features that might be called noble. His wife, in her 60s, has jet-black hair. Together they might pass for a couple immortalized in a mosaic on the walls of Pompeii, or perhaps Lepidus Magna. Caption: Professors Erich and Gabriel Lehnsherr, Vienna, Austria. E.L. You were certain that you were able to go through with this? G.L. I'm not a flower, Erich. E.L. I didn't mean to suggest. G.L. They aren't here to watch us argue. Yes, I knew Charles Xavier. Interviewer. Where did you meet him? At the Institute in Haifa. Only he was calling himself Charles Marco, that Dr. Charles Marco. Interviewer. This is where he brought you out of your coma? GL. Yes, but I'm sure now that we met earlier, at least, that he saw me in Tangiers. Interviewer. That was where you went into the coma. GL. Yes. Collapsed in the street, woke up in Haifa. Interviewer. Under the care of Charles Xavier. GL. Yes. Interviewer. And you, Professor Lehnsherr, you were her physician? EL. What have they been saying about me? No, I was an orderly. GL. Erich was badly hurt during the war. EL. What she means is I was written off as a terminal head case. GL. He was in. EL. None of that. They don't need to hear of that. GL. I'm sorry, Erich. Erich could not hold a conversation when I first saw him. EL. This was true. I had no words. GL. Until you saw. EL. Until I saw what he was doing to you. Shot. Benjamin Koopman. BK. Rape. No doubt about it. Practically necrophilic rape, if he started when we think he did. Cocky bastard thought Lehnsherr was a vegetable, just like everyone else did. Shot the Lehnsherrs. EL. He thought I was a vegetable, fit only for emptying bedpans. Watching him awoke something deep within me, not only my soul, but also my mind. I knew he was doing something unusual, something I would have to guard against. Interviewer. No one suspected that he was a psi? EL. Not then, no. I played dumb until I could read again. It was terrible, but I knew I had no other choice. It was pure luck that he assumed I was still vegetative. When I could read, I researched his background and found no records about his background in the hospital files or anywhere he claimed to have been. I made a file of evidence and took it to the hospital administrator. He summoned Xavier and they had a meeting. I went to see the administrator later and he tried to fire me. Xavier was there, working the man like a puppet, but he couldn't work me. He told me he would kill me. I think he tried to do something, but he failed. He took out a pistol and tried to shoot me. It was then that I discovered that I had a special ability as well. Interviewer. With magnetism. EL. Oh yes, no control, however. The bullet wounded the administrator. Xavier ran away in the confusion. GL. Eric. EL. Too much. GL. I think. EL. George. Where is that blasted man? GL. Probably preening himself in front of a mirror again. GH. Mein Herr? Caption. George Hyder. Chauffeur to the lectures. EL. Could you please take my wife back to the villa? GH. Jawohl, Herr Dr. Professor. EL. Where were we? Interviewer. The administrator had just been shot. EL. Ah, yes, well, there was quite the scandal. The scandal, but Benjamin got to the bottom of it very quickly. Even so, Xavier escaped without a trace. Interviewer. After that, you married Frau Professor Haller? EL. I fell for her, quite hard. I could not help myself, so young, pregnant, so alone. We raised her son as our own. Interviewer. David Lehnsherr. EL. Yes. Shot of Cooperman. It's a phoenix story, I tell you. Rising right out of the ashes, we had all the hospital staff saying, "Don't listen, he's a vegetable." And this so-called vegetable is giving me a perfectly documented file of evidence showing how Xavier fooled everyone. If he hadn't gotten all political about the Arabs, he'd probably still be here. They made him live in a neutral country because the superpowers were terrified of him. He told me he went to Austria because Switzerland was too boring. Shot of EL raising a crippled Russian submarine from the seafloor. Clip of EL looking on as Ho Chi Minh and Lyndon Johnson shake hands in Saigon in 1965. Clip of EL welcoming Nelson Mandela into his cabinet office in Hofburg, Vienna in 1966. Clip of Jean-Luc Picard, Jack Lang, and the Prime Minister of the Cayman Islands having just witnessed the signing of the General Agreement on Taxation of Traditional Cultural Preservation. Clip of GL at the UNHCR branch in Dover welcoming the first of 50,000 Czech and Slovak. There is a slur here for Romani people here, but I'm not going to say it. Families to be settled in Britain. Clip of EL and Prime Minister Mikhail Gorbachev as EL puts old Soviet submarine reactors into cometary orbit around the sun. Shot of Erich Lehnsherr. So you don't regret living in Hitler's birthplace? EL. He had to be born somewhere. It wasn't here in Brunau, I believe it was, somewhere in the hills. Austria is a civilized country now, and I do my small part to keep it that way. It is certainly more civil than some societies I could name. Shot of a dilapidated house in Westchester at night. Body bags are being brought out by ambulance attendees. A commercial comes on. It is for food. The food is steaming hot, flowing with rich, savory juices. She goes to the cupboard and takes out 2 large bags of chips, a giant-sized bag of chocolate chip cookies, a loaf of white bread, and a jar of peanut butter. She goes to the fridge and takes out 1/4 container of sour cream and onion chip dip. She seems pensive, looking at it all as if it somehow isn't going to be enough. That's where chapter 1 ends. We've been given a lot to work with here. To spoil things for those who care, the she that is watching the documentary is Kitty Pryde. She's been on the run from the cult for 10 years, maybe more. The bald man mentioned being led away from the house is Scott Summers. Dr. Benway makes a very clear choice calling a human being Oriental, but one of the people being identified is Betsy Braddock, Psylocke. At least one of them is. As of right now, the other Asian woman is unidentified and isn't named in the story. She could be any number of characters from the time period, be it Jubilee or Karma. One of the other women is later confirmed in the story to be Jean Grey. The story Vanderbilt was sold by Xavier is true to the comics. Xavier is descended from a family called Grey-Malkin, who is Dutch in origin. However, this version of Xavier's history remains a mystery. And that rhymes, so you know it's true. Currently, the roster stands by Miss Grundy's count as 7. Charles Xavier, Logan, Bobby Drake, Hank McCoy, Scott Summers, Warren Worthington III, and Jean Grey. I also want to bring attention to the fact that she makes mention of eating pate served by the school. It should also be noted that the spelling of Erich is not E-R-I-K, but rather the more correct German spelling E-R-I-C-H. This was the name given to the character before Max Eisenhardt was invented later in the 2000s as his proper name. I find it curious that Gabrielle Haller is mentioned as being in Tangiers when she first meets Xavier. In the comics, Gabrielle Haller went catatonic following the Holocaust. I think that this is to suggest that in this universe, Gabrielle Haller wasn't involved with the Holocaust at all, because she doesn't seem to share this trauma with Erich, only the trauma of being exposed to Xavier. There's also the surname, Marco, Marco being the surname of Xavier's stepbrother, Cain Marco, the Juggernaut. Is this version of Xavier using this as an alias, or is he actually related to Cain? This will not be the only reference to the Juggernaut in the story. I have no idea who George the chauffeur is, but I googled his name and I was presented with George Heider. That's J-O-R-G-H-A-I-D-E-R, the former leader of the Freedom Party of Austria. I also believe that the line, "if he hadn't gotten all political about the Arabs, he'd still be here," suggests an anti-Zionist version of Magneto, and it would be in line with some of Erich's more peacekeeping endeavors presented to us in the documentary. Lastly, I want to talk about the American president since 1956. McCarthy, I think, is meant to be Joe McCarthy. Kennedy is either Robert or John, but probably John. Johnson is Lyndon B., and then there's another Kennedy, I think Robert. I believe King is meant to be Martin Luther King Jr. Bradley, I have no idea. Then it's Kennedy twice, then Rodham, who I think is meant to be Hillary Clinton, then Rush, another name who I have no idea about. That wraps up this episode of X Manson Annotated. I hope that you'll all join me next Sunday when we cover the first section of Chapter 2.